It's been over a month since John Harbaugh was the Baltimore Ravens head coach, but that doesn't mean he doesn't still feel some type of way about his criticism.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Appreciate everybody for being here on this Purple Friday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Even if there's not a game, it's still Purple Friday here on Locked On Ravens. We got 5 days a week plus more daily Ravens coverage here for you. And on today's show, John Harbaugh, he still feels a type way about the criticism he took or continues to take as the head coach. I'm the former head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and we'll talk about his parting shot to that criticism here. We'll also dive into Jesse Minter finalizing his staff, and then we'll get into, is this going to be a more of the same offseason for the Ravens, or is there finally going to be a little bit of a different approach? A lot to get to on the show today, and here to do that with me, it is Sam Njoku from the Ravens Talk podcast and the Locked On Ravens Squad show. And Sam, I'm telling you, I'm gonna keep saying this until we get to free agency, but it is slowly creeping up on us here. Less than a month to go. You got the period where you can talk to guys starting on the 9th, and then the 11th is when the new league year officially starts. There's a lot to look forward to, and already some things are in the works, which is really exciting.
Oh yeah, this is the time if you're looking for a way to improve yourself as a football team. This period of time is where things get cranked up. You got a Super Bowl champion. Now it's time to fight for that spot that the Seattle Seahawks took in 2025-26 season right now. So Ravens are definitely going to be one of those teams you're looking out for to possibly make a move to make this team great again.
Yep, I'm ready. I'm ready for it. And, you know, I think a lot of the excitement for me, because, again, we still have free agency to go. We have the draft to go, potential trades. But the coaching staff gives me a lot of optimism here. And we'll get to the official finalized staff in the second part of the show. But I just think the change, right? It was time for something new. The Ravens, John Harbaugh's gone from Baltimore. Now it is Jesse Minter's show. But John Harbaugh still, he's talking about the Ravens. He wanted a little bit of a Baltimore press tour on Wednesday and throughout the week here. And he went on with Glenn Clark Radio. And Glenn does a great job. And I personally love how Glenn handled himself during this. Sam, John Harbaugh gave a little parting shot. It was pretty wild, in my opinion, to the Baltimore Ravens criticism that he faced. So he was asked by Glenn about a lot of different things. And one of those things was about, you know, Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter and those guys. And so he was describing some of the good qualities that those guys have. But then it took a really weird turn really quickly for Harbaugh. And so I'll start there. I'll just read out the entire interaction. Harbaugh said, quote, "I remember people wanted to run Mike out. People didn't want me to hire Mike. People in Baltimore, you might have been on that train," referring to Glenn. And Glenn said the Dolphins game was a little questionable, which, I mean, it was. That game was pretty hard, but it was also Mike's second ever NFL game calling defensive plays. So then Harbaugh said, quote, "So you're saying you were wrong, and I appreciate you saying you were wrong at that time because you were proven wrong, and that's okay because that's a moment in time, and I was right, and I was proven right, and I was proven right about Jesse too. And I'll stand by that because I know what a good coach looks like when I see it, and I'll be proven right about Zach Orr too. You'll see." And then went on a little bit of he was proud of that and his guys and whatnot. And then Glenn followed that up and said, "Can I ask you about Zach because you brought him up? Somebody would say, if that's the case, why isn't he your DC in New York?" Which is a phenomenal question and follow-up to that. And Harbaugh said, quote, "Because sometimes it's time to change. Zach and I have had those conversations, and we both felt it'd be best for him to go get the next opportunity to grow in a different way. So he gets a chance to grow in a different way. And I think it's going to be great for him to get a chance to do that. And it's going to be positive." So there's your answer to your criticism or whatever it might be. And then Glenn said, "Would that have been the case if you had stayed in Baltimore?" And Harbaugh was clearly getting a little annoyed at this point. And he said, "I don't know. I didn't stay in Baltimore, so it doesn't matter." I mean, this is a crazy interaction. Not on Glenn's part. Again, I thought Glenn handled it great. But, like, it's just this thing with Harbaugh that we had talked about all season, Sam, where it's just like this I guess, need for John Harbaugh to just be right about everything. Where like he needs to be right in what he believes is correct. What everybody else believes, if it doesn't align with him, is wrong. I don't understand this mindset from John Harbaugh. I think personally, look, I respect everything that John Harbaugh did for this franchise over 18 years. But to me, I just think this is a horrible look.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, shout outs to Glenn Clark. I think he does phenomenal work. If you guys don't know about him, make sure you guys go to social media and look at him because he does phenomenal work. And that was clearly a great example of that there. Look, I mean, I've talked about it before and I'll probably say it again. John Harbaugh's stubborn. He's a stubborn guy. How else can you explain having Daniel Filelli on that football field? John Harbaugh has to be proven right time and time again. And that was a glimpse. That was just a simple glimpse at what John Harbaugh did for this football team. Now, being stubborn the way John Harbaugh is can work in your favor at times. There's a time in the players to be stubborn. I don't think you could be the type of football team that you've been for the last 18 years in the Baltimore Ravens without having a coach with a little bit of ego, a little bit of stubbornness in him. But that was detrimental to his success in 2025 for sure. Cost him his job. I mean, let's be honest. His stubbornness cost him his job. He thought that he was going to do things a certain way. Nobody can tell John Harbaugh anything, it seems. And this is a prime example of how that will look. Now, Harbaugh making his little media tour, sure, fantastic to get to see John Harbaugh in another color and see him, having some success or hoping to have success. All shout outs to John for that. But this is a clear glimpse at what went wrong for this football team. John Harbaugh continues to be stubborn, and you can't tell him nothing. But I got to tell you, Glenn did a great job bringing up that Zachary Rohr comment because it goes to show you, if you prove us wrong by having him as your DC. I mean, it just made no sense to me.
Yeah, and again, like there was a lot of good that Harbaugh said about Baltimore in these interviews, and shared that he'll miss Baltimore and had a lot of good things to say about Lamar and the city and everybody he worked with and whatever. But like you're right, this is a glimpse into what happened with Harbaugh towards the end of his tenure. And again, like being confident in your guys and the guys that you have worked with, whether it be the guys you're currently working with or have worked with in the past, I don't have a problem with that. Like I don't have a problem, if John Harbaugh believes in Zach Orr to get another opportunity and be great, or, for Jesse to be great in Baltimore, which I think happens. He believed in Mike, which was awesome. That's great. But it's just the thing of like, oh, well, I was right in this. I was right about this and I was proven right. And, oh, you were wrong. You were saying you were wrong. It's just like, it's not that deep, but it feels like John Harbaugh goes the extra step and the extra mile. And again, like when there were questions about, for example, the offensive line about, hey, this is what's going on out there. Harbaugh's like, oh, it's good. I guess it's good. And it's like, everybody sees it. And it's like, not again for Zach Orr. I understand, like, yeah, he's a young coach. He probably will get another opportunity somewhere. I don't think he has another opportunity currently. I know he was maybe interviewing with the Cowboys at some point, but I'm not sure if that resulted in anything or will result in anything. So I have no problem with that mindset again, but it clearly didn't work in Baltimore. But Harbaugh's kind of taken like, I'm going to be right about this and you're going to be wrong about this. And it just feels like a bunch of like petty stuff where, yeah, again, I liked the McDonald hire personally. I do know there were a lot of people that were saying he's hiring his friends. But again, everybody wants the same thing here. Well, no, at least did when Harbaugh was in Baltimore. The fan base, the organization, the coaches, player, everybody wanted the Ravens to win a Super Bowl. It didn't work. It didn't happen. And it felt like John Harbaugh didn't put the team in the best positions to do that, to be successful, because he was willing to go down with the ship if it meant he could do what he believed was right, and kind of almost ignored everything that he was seeing out there. And yeah, it did cost him his job.
Oh yeah, cost him big time. I mean, I'm still stuck on the fact that he was on Glenn's case about being proven right about Zachary Orr when you have a huge opportunity to prove everyone wrong. Have all the doubters, have to, eat crow and admit that they were wrong about Zachary Orr, and you didn't even hire him into your staff. Not as a defensive coordinator, not as an inside linebackers coach, not even as an assistant to the head coach. You didn't even try to hire that guy. So I don't want to hear the notion that, it'll be proven wrong. Zachary Orr is going to prove you wrong at this point, because if you thought he was good enough to be your DC, he'd be your DC. So I don't want to hear any of that nonsense about Zachary Orr and proving us wrong. I want Zachary Orr to succeed. I think that he does have a bright future, but the fact is he was a young play caller We saw that going in. He didn't have the experience to back up that young play call mentality, something that Declan Dole has with Sean Payton and had with Ben Johnson. He didn't have that repertoire, didn't have that, say so in the defense going into this, position these last 2 years. So I'm not about it. I don't think it's, it's John Harbaugh in a nutshell. He's what you really don't see. Well, you see sometimes the little glimpses during media day, but this is who John Harbaugh is. He's a stubborn guy. He gets what he wants. That's how it's worked in New York. That's why the GM is answering to the owner and why the coach is answering to the owner and why he has an assistant that he goes to, a VP that answers to John Harbaugh, something that's never been done in the NFL. But all this is going to work to the benefit of the Giants, I'm sure. But his time in Baltimore was up. And that little 15-minute interview with Glenn Clark, again, shout outs to Glenn Clark, made it clear as day that Jesse Minter was the guy for the job. It was time for Harbaugh to go.
Sam, it makes me really sad for all of the great moments that this Ravens team had with John Harbaugh in 18 seasons. This is almost what is becoming what's talked about most with John Harbaugh. It's not the Super Bowl anymore. It's not some of that success that he had with Joe early in his career, getting to the AFC Championship game in their rookie years, respectively. Some of the great early years with Lamar when they were still figuring things out. It's become like these moments. And I don't want it to be that, because there was so much good in the John Harbaugh era. He did so much for this team, for the organization, for the city, but it just feels like the lack of accountability and just making these things about him being right or not. Like, again, Harbaugh is a guy that has repeatedly said he has no regrets, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to have regrets. Like, that's a totally reasonable thing. Like, hey, you know what? I made this decision. I don't have any regrets because I thought it would go this way. Okay, like, fine. But there's a difference between that mentality and the mentality of like, I have no regrets and I'm going to do everything in my power to try to back that decision up, even when it clearly was not the right one. And there are two different ways to go about it. And, I don't think John Harbaugh went about this the right way. There was a different way to approach this. Instead of getting into all the petty stuff about him being right and this and this and that, I think that's something that, when you hear Todd Monken speak, for example, to the media, and that accountability, that was something people wanted to hear from John Harbaugh. And very rarely did you hear that. And when he did it, it's like, no, John, you're so close. It's the wrong thing you're taking accountability for. But that's the type of thing. And I think everyone, and myself included, is looking forward to a fresh start with Jesse Minter and the way that he spoke in that press conference. He's someone that's not going to mess around with any of that. And I am excited for the Jesse Minter era in Baltimore. And coming up in the second part of the show, well, he finalized the staff. The Ravens put out the whole graphic, so we're going to read through all the names and talk about who we're most excited for and what this staff means for the success of the players on the roster. Stay tuned, plenty coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is when you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for. Trust Indeed, sponsor jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves. And Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Sam Njoku still rocking out with you here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for being here. We have 5 days a week plus more daily Ravens coverage here on the show. We have the regular show Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern time. This is episode 1705 consecutively here. I've never missed an episode dating back to when I started this show in 2019. But we also have bonus episodes on the weekends and there are headlines. Depending on that, maybe not. We might have some bonus episodes over the weekend, but we also have instant reaction shows after every single Ravens game during the season, as well as after every piece of Ravens big news. We also have watch-alongs during the season, during games, as well as the Locked On Ravens squad show with Sam and I, along with Qadri Ismail, former Ravens receiver and Super Bowl champion. And again, you're good for at least one Q rant per squad show when Q pops on with us. So dive into that. That's Mondays and Wednesdays, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And if you want some extra add-on content, the Everydayer Club, it is here for Locked On Ravens. You get weekly Q&As, access to one-on-one text conversations with me, access to the Discord server, ad-free episodes, etc. If you're interested, be sure to check out the link in the description below, as well as on the Locked On website on the Locked On Ravens page. But Sam, it feels so good to have this staff finalized, because we've been, over the past couple of weeks, we're like, all right, every day there's like one or two names that we're going to dive into, we're going to look at. The Ravens reportedly hired this guy. The Ravens started to trickle out these names officially. Well, they put out the big one, the big graphic on Friday or on Thursday to say, all right, here we go. This is your 2026 coaching staff. So I'm going to read through the entire graphic, and then I want to ask you a few questions about how you feel about certain guys just in general. So here's the staff. Head coach, obviously, is Jesse Minter. Then you got Declan Doyle as your offensive coordinator. Anthony Levine, senior, is your special teams coordinator. Anthony Weaver is your defensive coordinator. Harlan Bauer is the outside linebackers coach. Marcus Brady as the pass game coordinator. Randy Brown is your senior special teams coach. Gary Colbert is your wide receivers coach. Christina DeReuter is the chief of staff to the head coach. Lou Esposito, defensive line coach. Eddie Faulkner, running back coach. Sean Flaherty, assistant offensive line coach. Charlie Gelman, game management coordinator, defensive assistant. Prentice Gill, assistant wide receiver coach. Zach Grussi, tight ends coach. Ben Kotwika, senior assistant special teams coach. Patrick Kramer, offensive quality control coach. Dwayne Ledford, offensive line coach and run game coordinator. Joe Lombardi, senior offensive assistant coach. Mike Mickens, pass game coordinator and secondary coach. Rick Minter, football analyst. Andrew Rogan, defensive quality control coach. Tyler Santucci, inside linebackers coach. Miles Taylor, assistant defensive backs coach. PJ Volker, safeties coach. And Israel Wolfork, quarterbacks coach. You still here, Sam? I got you. You got you?
Barely, but man, what a list.
Everybody is on that list. So I love this staff. I think Jesse Minter did a great job from a whole perspective, Sam. You know, you got veteran coaches who have experience. You have young, up-and-coming coaches, both from the NFL and from the college ranks. A decent amount of college coaches coming over from college football. How do you feel about what Jesse Minter did with his staff, and what are some trends you see?
I think it was a fantastic job. I think my biggest concern for any rookie head coach coming in was being able to kind of garner enough talent from the coaching realm into this program. And one of the other issues I had was that, I mean, the league was just firing head coaches left and right, lots and lots of openings, meaning lots and lots of new staffs, lots of reshuffling. So my concern was that the Ravens wouldn't be able to get a nice group of young men or even, older men to come in here and coach these guys up. That was not the case. The Ravens did a phenomenal job, headlined by Jesse Minter, bringing in guys with a singular purpose, and that's the purpose that Jesse Minter talked about during his press conference, is guys that was going to come in, teach, be together, incorporate ideas with the players, and just go out there and win football games. And that's what we got here with guys like Declan Doyle, Anthony Weaver, and Anthony Levine. I mean, this is just a fantastic group of coaches. I'm very impressed that Jesse Minter, with little to no, experience in the National Football League, was able to come in and do this type of work here. And that's a testament to not only Jesse Minter, but the front office, to give him the green light to go out and expand his horizons, not only in the NFL realm, but in the collegiate atmosphere, to get these coaches under one roof to, try and win a championship.
Yeah, and we all know this is a relationships business, and that's something that obviously John Harbaugh, if you know a Harbaugh, you have a job in the NFL for a really long time. But I think Jesse Minter did a really good job of this too. And honestly, you see connections with Declan Doyle as well. A lot of them on the offensive side of the ball with Lombardi and Colbert, et cetera. It doesn't just stop there, but those are just a couple of those names. I think that it goes to show what Jesse Minter said up there during his press conference was true, that look, guys that know their X's and O's are obviously important, but the relationship building aspect of it, how they vibe with the players, those types of deals, like everything factors in. And you can see based off of these hires and based off of whether it's coaches that have worked with these guys, players that have played under these guys, whether it be current or former, feels like a ton of these guys, a lot of them were getting respect from their guys. We're saying this is a perfect fit. I think the perfect amount of holdovers like Levine and Randy Brown and Santucci, like those are solid holdovers that you have. I just thought it was a really good job by Minter.
I did too. And the big issue, I think, well, one of the big issues with this football team last year was sort of the semi rift between coach and players. It felt like players sometimes couldn't come in and indulge the coaching staff with suggestions. It just felt like the coaches were asking you to do something, the players just had to execute. And if you weren't executing, it's because you weren't doing your job well. And there's some truth to that. But overall, I think this is going to be an atmosphere where Jesse Minter is going to welcome that dialogue, not only between player and coach, but within coaches. That's why you see guys that are very close to Declan Doyle being on the offensive staff. That's why you see guys close to Jesse Minter being on the defensive staff. And even though there's a trickle effect with some guys who may not have that connection, maybe an assistant coach has a connection with a position coach. So those are the things that matter here. I think it's going to pay dividends very well. A culture was set here by guys like Brian Billick and John Harbaugh, and that culture will remain, but I think it's going to be a new twist on what's going to be offered here for this coaching staff and players in 2026.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Like I genuinely think it will be. Is there a particular name, Sam? Maybe let's start with the coordinators. Declan Doyle, Anthony Weaver, Anthony Levine. Is there one guy, and I think I might know your answer because I asked somewhat of this question on social media yesterday. Is there one of those coordinators that you're more excited for than the other? Not that you're not excited for all of them, obviously, but is there one guy that you're like, ooh, I'm really intrigued to see what this guy does?
It was Declan Doyle until we had that episode with Nick Moore on Wednesday. After that, I'm on the Anthony Levine train for sure. We asked Nick Moore, and if you guys haven't seen it, please go to the Locked On Ravens Squad show and watch it, the last segment of the show with Nick Moore. We asked Nick, hey, how do you feel about Anthony Levine being the special teams coach? And he went on a 10 to 15-minute rant about how lucky this Ravens football team is to have him and how excited he is to have him as a special teams coordinator. So I am so on board with Anthony Levine being the special teams coordinator. How much of an impact will that have on the overall success for this football team? I'm not sure. But if you got guys like Anthony Levine being the coordinator of this group that, has to perform in 2026 for this team to reach the ultimate goal, we have trickle effects of this guy's personality and want to around this team. It's gonna affect the players. It's gonna affect the coaches. It's gonna affect this team in a major way. So I'm very excited for Anthony Levine. And even though Zach Roy didn't pan out the way we thought, I love it when former players come out and be coaches, coordinators. Now Anthony Levine went the hard way. He traveled around a little bit, went to Tennessee for a little bit, didn't just stay here in Baltimore and make a name for himself. He made his name for himself elsewhere, came back, and now he's a special teams coordinator. So very excited for CoCap to come in here and lead this special teams group to 2026.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool hire. I agree with everything you said there. And I will play the Declan Doyle card here. Not that I'm not excited for Anthony Weaver, but I just think it's different with Doyle calling plays for this offense. I think Weaver is going to be great in kind of a general role for that defense, going out there and being that leader for them. But with Declan Doyle, just the differences in this offense that we're probably going to see, the different concepts. And even with a guy, and I guess I'll cheat and give my assistant I'm most excited for in Dwayne Ledford. But, him and Declan Doyle working together, I think a lot more heavy receiver sets and the play action game working really effectively. There's so much that they can do to open up this offense even more. And again, he'll probably keep some of the good things that this Ravens offense has done in the past. I mean, that's what happened with Greg Roman and Todd Monken, is obviously Todd was brought in to open up the offense even further. But a lot of that was Greg Roman's run game that Todd Monken was working with. So I'm excited for Declan Doyle coming in there, working with Lamar, and especially knowing that he's a guy that was already getting interviews for other OC jobs, would have probably been maybe the head coaching cycle next year if things had continued to go the way they were going in Chicago. I'm excited for that. Now, again, I cheated and gave my assistant that I'm most excited for in Dwayne Ledford. Was that also your answer, Sam, or is there somebody different?
I'm very excited for Dwayne Ledford. I'm not going to lie to you. He looks like he's going to come in here and change this around for the better. I also like the hire of Lou Esposito, the defensive line coach here. I think that he's going to be fantastic. I think that the Ravens have already had good defensive line coaches in the past, but I think that this is going to be very good for him, especially if Nanimata BK were to make his return, and the Ravens have to make a move to increase the talent here in the defensive front. Regardless, he's going to have a nice surge of talent to work with, and I think this could be a group that we're talking about at the end of the year being one of the more dominant groups on this team.
I'm pumped. I'm really pumped. Coming up with the final part of the show, we'll talk about if the Ravens will get out of their comfort zone this offseason or if it is just going to be more of the same. So stay tuned. Plenty coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events, finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast, speed skating races decided by inches, hockey games that feel different right from the opening faceoff. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. And the Olympics has it all, and FanDuel has you covered with everything you need. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Locked on Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Sam Njoku, still here with you on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks again for being here. If you have a friend or a family member who is a Ravens fan or wants daily Ravens coverage, be sure to send them over our way here on Locked on Ravens. It's the same show, both audio and video form, so you're not missing out on anything there. Sam, this is a big offseason. I say this every offseason, but it genuinely feels like it this year. Different stakes, though, because, again, with John Harbaugh, it's like, okay, we know what this is. So if this is not the year and this is not the offseason, then when is it coming? This year with Jesse Minter and a new staff coming in, that change, it's more of like, okay, we're excited to see what that is, but the Super Bowl or bust mentality doesn't necessarily go away there because you don't want to waste years of Lamar Jackson's prime. Now, again, we know this team has to go hard in the trenches, right? You got to get your offensive line and your defensive line situated. There are some other sneaky needs that can be brought to the table as well. But the big conversations have been, and again, with the speculation of, is A.J. Brown coming to Baltimore? Is Max Crosby coming to Baltimore? Is this the year you see the Ravens trade maybe one first-round pick? I don't know if I'll get as much as the 2 or the 3 that some people are saying Max Crosby is worth, but do you think it's that type of splash move this offseason, or do you think it's going to be more of, well, they're going to play the market, wait it out a little bit, use the comp pick formula, and just kind of have things fall to them as they usually do?
I think this is the year. I think this is the year where the Ravens finally make a move, a big-time move. The Ravens haven't really, these last free agency periods, had a big money splash because, again, you've had Lamar Jackson. You've been hanging your laurels on the fact that Lamar Jackson is who he is. I thought last year would be the year they'd make a move, but obviously there were people in the coaching staff, John Harbaugh especially, who didn't take the notion of a Super Bowl or bust seriously, and it bit him in the butt for sure as he is no longer the coach. But I think this year there's a little bit of fire. I'm not saying Eric DeCosta's in the hot seat, but his seat is a lot warmer than it was a few years ago. He understands that with a new coach, you want to give him a boost heading into the 2026 season. And there'd be no better boost than getting an all-pro player or a Pro Bowl player to come in here and help Lamar Jackson and this offense, or Roquan Smith and this defense win football games. So I think it's going to be a big splash. I think they're going to end. If you want to know what position group I'm thinking, most likely I think it'll be receiver. I don't know why. I just have this notion that the Ravens are going to change the way they play offense in 2026, and they may not be comfortable with the guys they have now. I think these guys can play football, but if you really want to take your team to the next level, you may need an alpha like an A.J. Brown, an alpha like a George Pickens to come in here and make this offense an elite offense in 26. It's going to be a little more difficult to get a defensive guy like Max Crosby because, as you mentioned, it's going to cost a little bit of rounds in terms of picks here. And I don't know if Eric DeCosta is ready to do that, but for a guy like A.J. Brown, may not cost you more than a second-round pick. For George Pickens, may not cost you more than a first-round pick to get him in here. But I think the Ravens will do very well in making a splash in 2026.
Yeah, I would probably, again, and there's a lot of conversation already, Sam, about who's getting franchise tagged and who's not. I think the expectation is that George Pickens potentially could be. But my rankings would be George Pickens number 1, A.J. Brown number 2, and then I'm doubling down on my squad show take. Get Jalen Waddle to Baltimore. I'm doing it. Get Jalen Waddle to Baltimore. All right. Miami's in a situation, maybe you could include a Bateman in that trade. Who knows? but we're going Pickens, A.J. Brown, and If we're talking receivers, Jalen Waddle is that other choice there. And again, even like Trey Hendrickson, there's a possibility he gets franchise tagged in Cincinnati, which is a crazy thing. But I think Hendrickson would be a perfect in-between option between Max Crosby and giving up all that capital and having to do the contract stuff anyway, versus giving Trey a 2-year deal at $40 million total. Like I'd be down with that. You can move some money around in that way. Obviously there's the Khalil Mack and Odafe Oweh connection. I'd be interested to see what they do there. And the offensive line's a really big one too, because usually a lot of good linemen don't hit free agency. The Ravens obviously have their own offensive lineman they got to figure out, and Tyler Linderbaum. Hopefully gets done sooner rather than later. But to you, I think that there's a lot of speculation about Eric DeCosta and making that big move. How disappointed would you be if it's more the same for Baltimore? They prioritize those draft picks and, wait for that comp pick deadline to expire, maybe sign 1 or 2 guys on the first couple of days of free agency. Would that be a big disappointment? Or do you think that this base roster is good enough where they can do that again?
I'd be disappointed. And the only reason why I wouldn't be as disappointed in Eric DeCosta is if they're unable to get an extension done with Lamar Jackson, and that kind of puts you in type of a bind in years to come. So that would be my only way that I wouldn't give criticism to Eric DeCosta. But besides that, there's a lot of players who want to get moved here. You got the draft capital. You've got the eagerness from this fan base to make a move. I don't want to talk about the Orioles here on the Ravens podcast, but there were some promises made from the Orioles that didn't keep. The Ravens haven't made any promises, but I think the Ravens are expecting, at least the fans are, for the Ravens to make a move, to make changes, because I know John Harbaugh is going to get a lot of the blame for what happened here, but it wasn't just him. The personnel here were flawed. There were dire holes here that cost the Ravens big time, and if the Ravens don't do enough to make these changes, even though Jesse Minter, I think, is a fantastic play caller, may not be enough to get them to where they need to go here in 26.
There's a lot of different avenues the Ravens could take here. And again, that's what I think is so exciting to me about this offseason, Sam, is there are a lot of paths they could take, and there are honestly some perfect paths. There's not one where it's like, okay, if they don't get this guy, their offseason is over and it's a failure. Now, Linderbaum not coming back, we might have to have a little bit of a different conversation. Oh, yeah. Although, again, there are options to replace him. I personally think that'd be catastrophic if that were to happen. But again, if it's not Hendrickson, you can pivot somewhere else. If it's not Crosby, you can pivot somewhere else. If you don't get an A.J. Brown, all right, you can go somewhere else. Offensive line-wise, you don't get a guy like Peter Woods at 14 on the interior, you can go somewhere else. There are so many, like we talked about the coaching situation. There was a great path for them with Clint Kubiak, with the Schwartz as a DC or whoever that veteran DC was going to be. There was also a perfect path with Minter. They took a perfect path with Minter. I think it's going to be great for them. But I'm not necessarily, because there are certain guys that I prefer. I am personally on the Hendrickson train, but if they don't get Hendrickson, there's enough out there where I'm not going to say, okay, Hendrickson's gone, pack it up, see you next year. Like there's enough for them, Sam, where I think it will be okay if a couple of the top guys go off the board, but you don't want to get too passive. That's my only concern.
You don't want to get too passive. I mean, if Max Crosby gets traded to, the Philadelphia Eagles, for 2 firsts, you're like, couldn't give up 2 firsts? Sure, but maybe, the Raiders don't want to trade inside their own conference, so you let it slide. Trey Hendrickson signs an extension with the Bengals. Okay, sure, he's played there for his whole life. Fine. Odafe Oweh gets a big-time contract. You've had him for 4 or 5 years. He's the second best free agent edge rusher in this class, I'd imagine. So he's going to get money. Okay, maybe it's too costly. But the more you make excuses for this team, the more and more you're waiting until, already it's May, and you're left with the few rookie, players here from that draft class and not a lot else.
Yeah. Actually, one guy that Q actually brought up on the squad show, and I've mentioned it here and there, but Q really took the stance on it, so I'm going to give Q the credit for it. Jalen Phillips. Makes a lot of sense with Anthony Weaver and the connection from Miami. He's a guy that, again, if the Ravens don't get Hendrickson, Jalen Phillips is a perfectly good plan B, and maybe he's your plan A and Hendrickson is plan B. Like, that's how good he can be. So, again, there are plenty of avenues that I would be excited about for this Ravens team. But, Sam, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on. Before I get you out of here, tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Ravens Talk Podcast. You can also find me on YouTube at Ravens Talk Podcast. Our show airs at least once a week, but we're going to have a show here this weekend talking about the coaching changes here for the Baltimore Ravens and the free agency period as we get ready for that next month. So make sure you tune in for that. You can also find me on the Locked On Ravens Squad Show with Kevin Oestreicher and Kadri Ismail talking Ravens football. So very excited to continue, guys, talking with you guys about that Mondays and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure you guys stay tuned.
Be sure to check everything Sam has going on, and the links will be in the description down below. Sam, I appreciate you again. Thanks so much. And thank you to everybody who watched and listened to Locked On Ravens today. Coming up, again, might have some bonus episodes over the weekend or might not, depending on the headlines. But if not, we'll be back here on Monday with our regularly scheduled programming. So be sure to stay tuned. Hit the like and subscribe button in video form. Follow along and subscribe in audio form. And I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.